Welcome to the Audible Genius podcast, where we take a behind-the-scenes look at being a musician. I'm Joe Hanley, and today I'm talking to Chen Neeman, an award-winning, multi-platinum-selling songwriter, producer, musician, and coach. We'll be talking about what it's like to write music in front of other people, what it's like to have an unexpected major success only to find yourself in over your head, and how to suck less more. Let's get started. All right, Ken, thank you so much for joining me here and coming on the show.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
Why don't we start? Just tell me a little bit about what you're doing now in music.
So now I guess I'm a songwriter producer. I write and record songs for mainly film and TV these days. And yeah, that's pretty much all I do on a daily basis. And
Right.
apart from that, I have my educational website, hitsongcoach.com, where I sort of mentor aspiring artists and writers in songwriting and production.
Oh, cool.
So that's my
And
mission.
the studio you're in right now, it's in your home?
Yes, so this is kind of like a little, yeah, you got a little motion there. This is my
Nice.
my place. This is my second studio that I've built.
Oh.
I learned a lot from all the things not to do in my first studio,
Okay.
and did it much better in this one. And yeah, I did it myself with a little bit of help from people who can lift heavier things than me, because I can't lift heavy things. And yeah, and it's been, I think, 8 years now here. So
Wow.
I love this room.
Cool.
So
So you're happy with how you set it up this time?
oh, absolutely. I learned a lot more about, tuning the room and what I need and what versus what I don't need. And a lot of stuff that I spent money on last time that was just completely pointless to spend it on this time. And there's a better vibe in this room too. I got like faux brick everywhere. That's kind of very East Coasty. Kind of reminds me of
Okay.
days of Boston. Um, and yeah, it's a good vibe in here for sure.
That's cool. So you found in your previous iterations that maybe you'd acquired gear that you thought you needed and turned out not to?
Absolutely. Throughout my career, I'm like, oh, this looks shiny and beautiful and will make me sound great. You know, I just I find that the stuff I think I need, I never do need, and the stuff I don't think I need is the stuff that I always do need.
Right.
So it's
That's
interesting
interesting.
that.
So it's taken you years to get away from that gear acquisition syndrome that many of us have.
Yes, and also because of the people that I hung around with, because you and I both know Eris, our contest, if I don't know if you
Mm-hmm.
remember, and
Mm-hmm.
who was my partner for many years, and we still work and hang out together. But he is a gear acquisition fanatic, and for a long time, he's like, "You should get that," and I'd be like, "Yeah, he knows what he's talking about," and we do like a little shootout between the things, and then I'd get that, and I'd use it 4 or 5 times, but then I'd be like, so. But I learn. You live,
Okay.
you learn.
Exactly. So that's where you're at now. I want to go all the way back to the beginning. Do you recall, like, what was the first? When did you first go from just being someone who listens to music to someone who wanted to start creating it or playing it?
Well, I was a kid. I was very young. I
Mhm.
guess music for me really started with my mom. She would, drive us around in the car and play Queen and the Beatles and like Phil Collins and Peter Gabriel and stuff like that. Um, and then I had a very good friend who was a piano player, and every time we would hang out at his place, he'd be playing piano, and I kind of wanted in on that, but I didn't want to be a piano player because there's already a piano player. So I settled on guitar, and I remember when I told my dad I wanted, because my dad was not into music, and I told him I wanted an electric guitar. He said to me that electric guitars are for hooligans. And then somehow somehow I wore him down. Um, I know, I don't know why. So that I wore him down, and I got an electric guitar. I got a Yamaha RGX 112, which was like the cheapest, like worst plasticky type guitar thing. It was so bad that like the guitar jack would like break if you like stuck it in a little bit too hard or something. It was horrible. Um, and then I started playing with my friend. I'd go over to his house after school, and he would like teach me like jazz standards and like Equinox and like John Coltrane stuff
Mhm.
and all that. Um, and that's kind of how I just sort of like moved into it. It wasn't like I said to myself one day, "Oh, I like listening to music, let me make it," you know. It's
Right.
just sort of there was a guitar and I started playing, and before I knew it, that's what I was doing. That was who I was before I really knew it,
That's cool.
you know.
So were you primarily self-taught, or like did you have teachers, or was it more picking up things from your friends and working on it on your own?
Well, I started picking up things from my friends, and this was like, 90, 91 or something like that. And Nirvana had just come out, and the whole grunge thing. And they would like teach me little songs. And then I got my first guitar teacher who just like straight up just taught me Zeppelin all the time, you know, just learning Led Zeppelin. And I'd be sitting playing Stairway to Heaven, and all that stuff. Um, and he took me to a good chunk of the way, but then right when I was about to enter high school, um, I got like a serious real teacher, like a heavy hitter. And I knew him through another friend of mine who was also a great guitar player, and he was like one of the top because I'm originally from Israel, so he was there's great musicians in Israel, but like sorry, that was my ringtone thing. Great musicians in Israel,
That's
but
all right.
like not a lot of the top great guys, and he was like one of the top great guys. And so I was with him pretty much till I went to Berkeley, and he was amazing.
Okay.
He's still amazing, just an amazing guitar player. So yeah,
Did you notice a big difference in your abilities or like your development when you switched from being self-taught to a teacher?
it was like I had a good friend that said it to me once. It was like you know, you can look for your keys in your house in the dark, and if you fumble around enough, eventually you'll probably find them. But it becomes so much easier to find them if you just turned on the light. And I think once I
Hmm,
had that great teacher, it was really like somebody turned on the light, and things became easier to achieve. You know,
that's cool. So was it, I mean, I know there's so many benefits to having a good teacher, but was it kind of like you didn't have to guess how to take steps? He could kind of tell you the steps to take so you could just focus on executing?
in the beginning, it was pretty much just I was like, you take control, you tell me what I need to do. And it was freeing to not have to you know consider how do I get better, to just do the things that we're told. But interestingly enough, when I look back on it now, I realize that everything he was teaching me was simply giving me the tools so that I can one day figure it out on my own, you know?
Got
But yeah, it was I remember the first thing he put in front of me was the Omnibook by Charlie Parker and the all the Charlie Parker tunes. And the first thing we learned was Billy's Bounce and the solo the alto saxophone solo and Billy's Bounce on guitar. And we spent like a couple of months on that one, and it was very much like wax on, wax off, because I was all like, okay, I mean, I'm just gonna learn these bebop lines all the time. I want to play, I want to do this, I want to learn runs, I want to be fast, I want to be cool, you know. And it was
it.
very
Mhm.
much like wax on, wax off, you know. And then years
So he was
later, it was
kind of,
great. Sorry, guys.
go, go ahead.
Well, I was saying only years later was I like, man, the lessons I learned from just learning that solo, you know,
Hmm.
took me years to figure out.
So at this time, and you're like in high school, you're really focused on jazz,
Oh,
but
100%.
nowadays, you're writing and producing a lot of film and pop. So when did that transition start happening? Was that something that you kind of did you change course in college, or like when did you start kind of getting less interested in jazz and more interested in what you're doing now?
Well, for first, I've never been less interested in jazz. Jazz has always been
Mhm.
something I still listen to Pat Metheny, you know, almost every day. You know,
Okay.
just because it's in my playlist, and I take the kids to school, and then they drop them off at school, and it comes on, and I'm just grooving to it. But I think what happened was while I was an instrumentalist, while I was really focusing on being an instrumentalist, I was a massive jazz snob. Like, as far as I was concerned, there was no other type of music besides jazz, instrumental improvisational music. So, jazz, jazz fusion, whatever you want to call it, you know. And I really didn't think that there was anything else involved in it, like nothing better. And then I got to Berkeley and I started studying at Berkeley, and um, you get exposed to a lot of different types of music at Berkeley because you're in different ensembles and this, and you sort of learn about you sort of become less arrogant and realize the artistry exists across styles, across genres. They're not limited to a genre. But how I sort of ended up here is, as I was going through Berkeley, I was playing in all these different bands, like cover bands and project bands and stuff like that, and um, started writing songs with people, or little riffs or whatever, um, and it really was playing in those cover bands and playing pop music that really sort of got me into pop music. My pop music experience before was, Sting, really, and I wasn't really listening to like a lot of top 40 stuff. But once I was in Berkeley, it became a lot of top 40 stuff. And because of the people I was hanging around with, my roommate was he's still an amazing producer and songwriter, David Nathan, and he would just get me into all sorts of stuff and Stevie Wonder stuff and Joni Mitchell and all this kind of great stuff. And yeah, and it was sort of like a process of me becoming less arrogant and less of a jazz snob.
Right. Yeah, I can relate to that
Yeah.
100%. Um, and you kind of said that sometimes it would just be riffs. So was it sort of gradual, like maybe as opposed to bringing in a wholly written song to a group, it was more like, oh, let me like write a line here, let me put something here, kind of like dipping your toes in.
Well, yeah, in the beginning, I'd like to say I was, terrible as a songwriter. In the beginning, my songwriting was limited to, coming up with interesting riffs and interesting sort of forms, you know. So at the time, John Mayer was just getting big, and Dave Matthews was big, and Dave Matthews is just riff music, riff, 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 riff after riff, guitar, acoustic guitar riffs, you know and so I was just emulating really, and like coming up with riffs and ideas. And um my real sort of school of how to turn these riffs into song was Nine Eyes, which you were actually there, if you if you remember, the
Yeah,
band that your roommate
I
was
do.
in. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Carrie Turner, who was the singer of that band, we started writing songs together. And she was already, I think, an experienced songwriter at that point, and working with her got me seeing song in, in all its different ways. It's not just about the cool guitar riff. It's not just about the cool this part, this drum fill. It's not about this. It's not about that. It's sort of an overall, like the sum of its parts. And I just started writing more and more, and before too long I had an opinion about the melody, and before too long I had an opinion about the lyric, you know um and I like to say that, like, when I started writing songs I sucked. After that whole 9 nights experience, I sucked a little less, and progressively each song that I wrote I sucked less at, and now I suck less than I did before. you know but there's more to
That's
that second.
yeah. So the basic advice is suck less more,
Yes,
right?
exactly. Suck less more. And I think if you do that consistently, you'll be at a good spot.
That's actually quite wise. I
Yeah.
actually like the way you put that, because I think a lot of beginners always just think, oh, I suck, I suck, I suck, and really, yeah, we all
Yeah.
suck in the beginning, but suck less more
You
as
suck
as
and
you
then
do
you
it.
quit. A lot of people suck and they're like, oh, I suck, I quit. And I'm like, no, no,
Mhm.
no. The sucking is the best part, because now you can just get better. And
Exactly.
I saw
Yeah.
this great diagram. I don't remember. It was like the stages of learning, which was stage one is unconscious incompetence, so that you don't know that you suck. Step two is
Okay.
conscious incompetence, the moment you know you suck, which is the most important moment. Step three is conscious competence, where if you work really hard at it, you maybe don't suck so much. And then step four is unconscious competence, where you don't really think about it and you don't suck. So
That's very.
I
I
live my
like that
life
a
by
lot.
that.
So this kind of gradual sucking less and like contributing more and more, was that sort of organic process all also how you started to transition to production as well?
Yes, but for me that was a kind of a necessity. So I had this thing. So I moved out to LA, and I just sort of made a living as like a sideman, a guitar player. I played in like a dozen bands, and we'd play all these clubs on the Sunset Strip and the Viper Room and the Key Club, and like I'd make like $100 a gig. Um, and um, I just sort of, worked as a guitar player all the time. But at the same time, I was still good friends with and worked with Air Sarkontis, who I mentioned earlier is an amazing songwriter, producer, and mix engineer, audio engineer, just top notch. And he, working with him, you know, he would take on a lot of the roles of the production. Like I would be sitting there because I didn't know how to use Pro Tools or Cubase or anything. I didn't really know anything about anything. I was just writing songs on the guitar and a piano. And I would sit next to him, and really it started with that band Nine Eyes, where we would just sit next to each other, and I'd be like, well, that I feel like that should sound like this, or maybe this should sound a little bit more like this. And I really was talking about the music that I heard, not really knowing how to make it. I was just saying, this is kind of what I hear. And he would translate it, of course, adding his amazing ideas as well. And all together, it would all kind of like turn into a production. And I loved working with him, and I worked with him for many, many years, even, up until like a few years ago. Um, um, but at some point, my understanding got to the point where I was getting frustrated with having to vocalize what I'm feeling and what I'm hearing, and having to explain it. And I was like, it was so much easier if I just knew how to do it, And I remember getting my first M box Pro Tools, this tiny little blue box that had like a little thing on it. um, and just sucking, really, really sucking, but having the great benefit of a teacher like Eris at the time, who didn't know he was teaching me, but just sitting behind him for a decade, be like, well, I'll try this, I'll try that, you know. And so possibly I sucked for less time than most people because I had such a great sort of like mentor who wasn't aware that he was my mentor while it was going on. um, but yeah, it was trial and error, and boy, did the early ones suck. Oh my god.
Well, I mean, production is so complicated, right? Just the DAWs and everything that goes with it. There's just so much to do.
And for our listeners who want to endeavor to do the same thing, make and produce music with software, I highly recommend Building Blocks. This is an online course that we've designed that will take you step by step through the compositional elements of production. You'll learn how to write the building blocks of beats, like drum patterns, bass lines, chord progressions, and melodies. And it all takes place in an actual online DAW where you create music as you go. Check it out at audiblegenius.com.
Yeah, and it was a whole new world of a whole new set of skills that I didn't necessarily have beforehand. And yes, I had a musical education, and a good musical education will take you a long way. But you know, I had no idea about, I didn't do synthesis or something. I didn't know what envelopes were. Envelopes were things you stick letters in. I didn't know, I didn't really understand what compression was. Oh, you put it on everything. Everything gets compression, everything gets EQ. I'm like, I don't even know what it does, you know? And so it took, a lot of trial and error. And I was, for the very beginning of all the production stuff that I did, was I just moved knobs around. I just moved buttons around and be like, well, this sounds a little better than that, or this sounds worse than that. And I look back at old hard drives, and I can see that there would be a session. And there's like 200 versions of that session because, you know, I'm like, oh, I fucked this up. I'm sorry. I mean, I messed this up. I did this up, whatever. I would just, save again, start again. So it took a lot of work, but hopefully it worked out. So.
Did this all happen when you were? Did the production stuff happen while you were still in college at Berkeley, or was this more after?
So I got my first M box literally right after I graduated Berkeley.
Okay.
And the production happened sort of in parallel with all my other work with other producers. But I wouldn't say that I called myself a producer until about, I would say 10, 11 years ago. That's when I started to be like, okay, then my tracks can actually sound good. But up
Got it.
until that point, I was just messing around.
So then you were in after college. You were in LA gigging, like as a guitar player. When did you start getting professional opportunities to do songwriting and production? Because you've worked with some pretty big names.
So it was all in like anything in LA. It's all in the relationships and the people that you get to know.
Hmm.
And I was gigging, I was playing guitar, and I went to a session with Eris. And Eris had told me, Eris and I were always after the band Nine Eyes. We were always like, let's just keep making music no matter what. We'll figure out what we'll do with it after. And I never really considered myself a songwriter. I was just a guy in a band writing songs, you know. Um,
Hmm.
and he went to a party and met some girl at a party, and was like, come write lyrics with us. And we just sort of like had this impromptu session, and we wrote a song, and that song sold 3 million records. That was like, it happened. It was like, I think we wrote like two songs. The first song didn't do anything. The second song was that. Um,
Wow.
and it was the our third co-writer. This person he met at the party was Jeannie Lurie, who was had songs with Disney before, and so she said, "Well, I heard about this opportunity coming up, and we pitched it." I was like, "Whatever, you know, not that's not something that happens." And then yeah, it sold 3 million records, and then instantly I was like, okay, so now I'm a multi-platinum songwriter. Now people are picking up my phone, returning my calls. People are listening to music. I'm getting opportunities I didn't before. It was terrifying because I still was
Yeah.
like, I'm not a songwriter. I accidentally wrote a song, you know?
Yeah, I could imagine that. Like, so it kind of jumped forward then at that moment. Did you ever then suddenly find yourself in a situation where you felt like I don't want to say unprepared, but like almost a little in over your head?
Absolutely. Actually, I would say that the entirety of my career is finding in myself in situations where I'm in over my head and unprepared, and then figuring out a way to make it through it. And I always feel like, though it doesn't look like it, I'm hope from the outside. I always feel like I make it through it by the skin of my teeth, you know. And at the end of it, I'm like, wow, I didn't believe that was something that I can do, but look at that, I did it, you know. And that's exactly what happened here. Is all of a sudden there was an expectation. Once you sell 3 million records, there's an expectation that the next song will be amazing too. Um,
Right.
and so here I am in the room with great writers who are so much better than me. Sorry, like I keep
It's okay.
getting like pings from my thing, who are so much better than me, you know? And the only real thing I could do to keep up is to soak up as much as I could. And it was terrifying. It really was. But then when I look back on it, I mentioned Pat Metheny before, one of my favorite guitar players. He always said, if you could be the worst person in the band, you're in the best position, because that's how you learn. And I really
Mhm.
think if I wasn't the worst person in the room, like the person who didn't know what they were doing, I wouldn't have progressed as fast as I did. And so because of the people I got to work with, because of that opportunity, all of a sudden, you know, my lyrics got better, my melodies got better, my conceptualizing of songs got better, and I really was lucky early on to get to work with a lot of really, really, really great songwriters in Eris Contis and Jeannie Lurie and Pam Shane and Shelley Peiken and Toby Gadd, who produced one of our songs. And it's just I had the opportunity to hear a lot of great music from a lot of great people and like feverishly take notes without them being aware of it. You know,
Wow. Did so that 3 million song with the two other writers, were people specifically asking for that team, like you three after that, or was it more
it
individual
wasn't
pieces?
specifically after that. We did enjoy really working together, and so we kept working a few together. And then we got like something like three or four really big ones in a row, and then it just sort of became a thing where um, we had a sound, we had a thing, and people were coming to us for it. And with Eris and Jeannie, I must have written, I don't know, 300 songs, um,
Wow.
like like a ton of songs, and we did really, really great stuff together. Um, and we would actually work, I think, like 2 or 3 times a week. would meet and just write for the sake of writing. And after a while, we wouldn't just write for the sake of writing. Just project would come in and we'd work on it.
Got it.
And it was really
All
cool.
right.
It was great. It was what I consider my school after Berkeley.
Okay. Wow. So if you're expected to kind of perform at that level consistently, do you do anything to sort of keep your mind in the right state? Because if you're, at least personally, if I'm off, it's harder for me to write. It's harder for me to make music. Do you do anything? Do you have any habits that you have that help keep you in the right mental state to
At
be
this
productive and creative?
at this point, yes. So you always have to be able to write even when you don't feel like you're able to write, because especially in film and TV, it's deadline, 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 deadline. You know, um, and I guess what I learned is two things. One, even when you feel uninspired, it could just be it's not necessarily that you're not coming up with good ideas. It's just you're not feeling those ideas at the moment, and maybe just giving it a little bit of time and coming into the room when you do feel better will make you look back at those ideas and go like, those didn't suck. I just wasn't in a headspace to say I like that today. um but for me, what I actually do is I write every day, and I write in the sense of like keeping my lyrical skills sharp, is I just sit and I write on my phone all the time. You know,
Hmm.
I constantly come up with um, weird combination of words and just write lists of them. You know, um,
Hmm.
so I'm always thinking lyrically, and somewhere along the road, and I'm not sure where this happened. My approach to songs became lyrical first, as opposed to the music first. You know,
Hmm.
I think what it was I understood that, yeah, there's could be a lot of music or everything, but until I marry the right melody with the right lyric and the right intent, I don't actually have a song. and and the interesting thing about it is, once I have a good hook with the right melody and the right intent, even if I haven't written the verses or anything, I'm like, oh yeah, this song is easy, and then I'll jump into doing the rest of it.
So will you literally have the lyrics without a melody first, and then you'll write a melody to that, and then the rest of the track will kind of come?
Not the complete lyrics. Like for example, I'll have a phrase in my head, okay, and then I'll sit at the piano, more often than not the piano these days as opposed to the guitar, um, and I'll sit at the piano, and it's almost like an obsessive prayer. I'll just say the phrase, and I'll say the phrase, and I'll try to say it with a different melody and a different line, and then a chord will come in, and somewhere in there, I'll be like, oh, well, that's kind of an interesting way of saying it, all right? And once I find that first interesting way of saying it, if it came from the lyric first, then I'll go with it. Then it's just me playing a chord progression and going gibberish, blah, 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 whatever I'm doing. It doesn't really matter to me at that point, because I know I'll be able to plug it in later, because I already know the intent. So, for example, last week I was working, and I got an idea, and I called it the upswing, right? And it was just sort of like a concept in my head. Everything has an upswing and downswing. Life is a pendulum, all that kind of crap. I didn't know, I didn't have a melody for it. I didn't have anything for it. So I just sat down with that in mind, and I just started playing these little chords, and they end up being very jazzy, kind of very, all these major seventh chords and all this kind of thing. And before too long, there was a groove that I was kind of digging, and I was playing it, and I started just, you know, yeah, swinging and sticking that word in different places, and then in like an hour or something, I had something that I kind of liked, right? And
Hmm.
there was no lyrics to it. It was just kind of like a melody approach with a little bit of where the lyrics, the hooks, the word upswing would fall. And then once I have that, it's like I'm off to the races. Then once I know kind of what the hook is, it won't take me that long to finish plugging in lyrics and going for it.
Huh,
Yeah.
that's cool. So it's a little bit of structure, it's a little bit of improv, and then once it gets started, it just keeps going.
When I'm by myself, yes. When I'm by
Okay,
myself
right.
and I don't sit and analyze what I do, it's very
Hmm.
organic. When I try to explain to other people how it got to this place of being organic, then then I can be a little more specific and say my ability to sit down and play a groove on the piano and just kind of improvise a melody isn't, I'm not touched by a Holy Spirit or something. It's not like magic. It's because, I spent years and years being an improviser. I spent years and years, listening to a ton of other music. I've developed an instinct for things that work, things that don't work. So when I come down and I start improvising a vibe, I know the notes are going to be right. I know it's going to be groovy and it's going to have a nice groove and feel to it. So I don't spend a lot of time doubting the ideas. I just sort of go idea, 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 you know?
Ah. And would
But
you say you developed that sort of improvisational ability from your days in jazz?
yes, and from from going and writing with a lot of different people, actually, people don't really talk about this, but in a writing session, it's really an improvisational situation. Yes, we don't all have instruments and we're not trying to like play solos over changes or anything. But, somebody throws you the ball and you're like, "Well, what about this melody? Oh, what about this lyric?" And it's feeding off
Hmm.
each other and it's very improvisational. And hopefully if everybody has good taste and good instincts in the room, then everybody will pick up on that moment where somebody says or plays something where you're like, "That's good. Let's build on that." Um,
Hmm.
but I think a lot of it is very improvisational and not being afraid to really just suck it up when you're being improvisational like that. It's easier when I'm here by
Yeah.
myself and nobody's listening, of course. But when you're in your room with other people, and most of the music you'll end up making will be in a room with other people, you know, I think it's
Yeah.
important to be okay with being terrible in the moment.
Okay. So like in the beginning when you were writing it with other people in the room, did you ever feel kind of conscientious, just sort of a
All
little
the
bit
time.
insecure that the stuff you're just making up at the top of your head is just going to be judged by these other people?
All the time. And le-
Mm.
and there's a little insight in that. It is absolutely judged by other people, and as a result, you are judged by those other people. That's something that happens, and some people will judge you and go, I don't ever want to work with them again, or I don't think he come up with good stuff, and it happens. It's the reality. Everybody has to accept that. Um, and I think letting go of that is something that doesn't necessarily take a year or two or three. It could take people a lot of years to get let go of you know am I coming up with good stuff? Do they like what I have to offer? I mean, are they judging me? Are they this? Are they that? Once you do, however, once you are more confident in your skill set, I think things become a little easier. But everybody has that in the beginning, hands down, everybody.
Yeah, and that's kind of like a life skill, right? Just saying people get conscientious about having a conversation at a party in front of other people. And I feel like that probably makes it even more intense now that your professional career
Absolutely.
is sort of on the line.
But it's such a social thing too, you brought up the party thing. It's completely a social thing. When you walk into a room with three other people that you've never met before in your life, and the expectation is that at the end of the 3 hour, 4 hour session, there will be a song. The first thing that has to happen is, everybody has to get along in the room. Everybody has to have a good vibe with each other. And I've been in many sessions where from the get go, you're like, I don't know if I'm feeling this dude, or I don't know what's going on here. And then there's weird vibes in the session. And yeah, there's a song that comes out because everybody's a professional, but maybe it's not the best. And then other times I've walked into a room and I've made lifelong friendships and like people that dear to me that I love and will work with forever. And even if I don't work with them forever, we'll, stay friends forever because, the first hour of the session is just, shooting the shit and, hey, what's going on? What's going on in your life? What are we talking about? And sometimes things get really deep, you know? And if you learn to be open, which is a really important skill, like you said, life skill and songwriting skill, um, it will come easier, you know?
Hmm.
So
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff you can't really learn in school, right? Or did you ever get that kind of advice from teachers or at Berkeley? Was that something you just learned by doing?
definitely not in school. Um,
Mhm.
it's funny. The funniest thing is that what I learned at Berkeley, you know, could be condensed into, a piece of staff paper. I learned the music at Berkeley. I learned the rules of the music, you know, the rules of harmony, the rules of counterpoint, all that stuff. But how to actually act in a professional situation, how to actually create professional music, that's all stuff that I learned on the job. And I think most people learn that on the job because you may have experiences in school that might teach you this stuff, but everybody is so green still, everybody's so new that you know you can't really look at another person and say, well, the way he's doing it is right, or the way she's doing it is right, so I'll do it that way. Everybody's just kind of figuring it out. So I think I learned, and by making a lot of mistakes too, by, I'm sure, not being easy to work with at some point, and working with people who weren't easy to work with, and just sort of got to a place where I realized, I think the most important thing is that whatever room you walk into, you leave your ego out of it. That took a
Hmm,
while for sure.
I bet. So while you were sucking less at writing and sucking less at producing, you were also sucking less at the social mental component,
I hope so. Yeah, I hope I've gotten to a
bit
place
by
where
bit.
people don't mind being around me.
Okay. That's good. It's a good life goal, right?
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Do you have a kind of a proudest moment in your career?
Well, I've been super lucky to have had really great moments in my career, really, really great ones, and worked with some amazing artists. But I have two that kind of stand out for me. One was almost a decade ago, and one was probably like a month and a half ago. Um, so my a decade ago, my proudest moment would have been we wrote a song for the Muppets movie, for the 2011 Muppets movie, and I got invited to the set while they were filming Kermit singing the movie, um, and it was just the most surreal experience of my life because it was Kermit.
Hmm.
It was Kermit. I mean, it's crazy.
Right.
And it was a big time, Disney Hollywood movie set, and it was a big deal. And I got to stand right behind the camera and watch as they were filming this. And it's kind of like an out of body experience where you're like, how did this song that I came up with in my closet at 3 o'clock in the morning while everybody else was sleeping because I didn't want to wake everybody up, you know, how has this made it to this point? And it was cool. And the song got nominated for Critics' Choice Award and got shortlisted for the Oscar. And he did it really, really great.
Wow.
And it was a really, really proud moment. And then my second, and there's a completely different reason. About a month and a half ago, I was working with a young songwriter. She was like in her like mid 20s. And she walked into the room and she said to me, "I just want you to know that I remember the day that I heard your song Rockstar, and that was the day that I knew that I was going to be a songwriter." And for me, that was like kind of an
Wow.
epic situation as an educator as well as a producer. That you know, we so as humans or as songwriters in general, we don't really get to receive a lot of accolades or a lot of like we don't really see our impact on the world around us that much, but to have a person specifically say to me, the persons I'm working with now that is a songwriter in their own right that have cuts with other artists, say to me, your song is the reason I became a songwriter, was kind of an epic moment for me. So I think those
I
would be
bet.
the two proudest
I bet.
ones.
So you mentioned coaching. So you spent your life learning, and then you become a professional in songwriting and production, and now you've started this coaching company. What was that transition like, going from being a learner and a doer to a teacher?
Well, I've always been a teacher since basically Berkeley. What I would do is I worked at a guitar shop in Walpole, and I would give like 30-minute lessons to like 6-year-old kids trying to learn how to play guitar. And then when I moved out to Los Angeles, I worked at during the day I work in a couple of music shops doing guitar lessons. At night I do gigs. Um, and so being a teacher is something I always did. But then, as far as teaching, songwriting and stuff like that, or coaching, I call it. It's not really teaching. It's just sort of, getting people to look at their music in a way they haven't thought about looking at their music before. Um, and the way I got into that was I was asked to do some um, speaking at Durango Songwriting Expo a few years back, and they asked me to just do like an hour's worth on my process. And I spoke about what I do for an hour, and the response was kind of huge. It was like so many people were interested and so many people wanted to know more. So I figured I'd kind of like, set something up like that. I'm pretty good at working with other people on songs. I'm terrible at promoting it. So I set up the website, and like most people that come and work with me are people that have met me in one of my speaking engagements, or I was speaking at NAM, I was speaking at the expo again. Um, and then they meet me and we have a conversation, and then they come and I work with them as coaching clients. Because I'm terrible at promoting stuff on Facebook and all that stuff. That's like I mentioned, I'm 40 something years old. I don't know that.
And for our listeners, what's that coaching website?
Oh, it's hitsongcoach.com.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
And the experience you've had coaching and teaching, have you noticed that it made you a better player in some ways?
Absolutely. I wouldn't say player these days because I don't consider myself a player anymore, because I only play to the extent that I need to in my music. Like if I need a guitar line here, if I need a piano this, there. If I have the budget, I'll hire other people to do it because I know there are people who are way better than me at it, so I might as well get them to do it. Um, but yes, I find that when I am deconstructing my own process and explaining my own process, I learn more about how I do what I do, and as a result, I learn to access my skill faster, I guess would be a way to say it. I was mentioning earlier, I just sit at the piano and it's kind of improvisational and stuff. That's how I approach it now. But I know that um, whatever I feed my ears during the month or the week will at some point find their way out of my hands and out of my brain. You know, so I know that if I spent, I don't know, a month listening to Randy Newman or something, I'm gonna be all Randy Newman in my songwriting. Or I'm gonna spend a month listening to, to John Mayer. I'm gonna come up with all these Mayer's riffs. But I think that teaching other people forces you to look at what you do, deconstruct it, and become better and stronger at it, and gain more confidence in it. I think that's actually a big part of it. The more confidence you have in your skill set, the better you perform that skill set, you know, because you don't spend a lot of time doubting it. And as I explain to other people, we talk about, well, how would you get to this lyric? And then I start having to ask myself, well, how would I get to this lyric? You know, maybe I'm playing word association games. Maybe I'm trying to find a different way of saying something that was said a million times before. Maybe I'm just taking two words that don't belong together and putting them together and coming up with a new concept. Learning or having to explain all this stuff makes me think about it, and as a result, just I always feel myself getting better after every.
So it kind of makes you take this process of yours that's been intuitive for so long and actually put it into words, like really look at it in
Yeah,
detail.
yeah, because I think the most interesting part about it is that you know we're unaware that we're doing it. Our hope for everything that we learn is that it becomes instinct. None of us want to. I mean, like walking, right? When we first started walking as babies, we were like, oh, leg, fall down, right? But at some point, it became instinctual. And now I'm not thinking about right, left, right, left, right, left. It just happens. And I want anything that I learn, anything musical, right, to become instinct for me. I want to be able to play a chord progression. And instead of thinking to myself, wow, I really need to go to the four here, I really need to go do the two, whatever, I want to go where my ear tells me to go without thinking about it, just feeling it. And the more of music, the more parts or the more aspects of music become an instinct for me, the better off I am. I think it's true for everybody.
That's yeah, well said. I think that is what every musician kind of longs for in
Yeah.
the end, and not to think through every moment. Do you recall encountering something that just seemed so hard it was almost insurmountable? Like you actually thought, maybe I won't be able to figure this out or figure out how to do this?
I don't think I believe in insurmountable. I think I think for most people who do what we do, on some level, we don't really buy into that, because I think once you become an instrumentalist, and even you're an amazing player. Holy Roman Empire, I still remember. You know,
Thanks.
um,
Thank you.
I still remember. Um, by doing that, we were once the people who picked up an instrument and were like, ding ding, can't figure out how to do this, to go to a place where we can play through complex jazz arrangements and all this stuff. I think once we are aware that we can do that, insurmountable doesn't really seem like a thing, you know? And
Yeah.
and what we do in general, hey, do you want to go make a life with music? Seems to an outsider like a complete, pipe dream. What is that? That's nothing. That doesn't happen. And yet somehow we make it happen. And so I've definitely been in a situation where I looked at the work ahead, or I looked at something that has to happen ahead and said to myself, how am I going to do this? And freaked out for, a day or two. But I always know in the back of my head that once the freak out is over, the work begins, and small incremental change leads to large exponential growth. And I think if we understand that, and if we can accept the fact that when I started working on my piano skills, because I was a terrible piano player, if we can accept the fact that I will be a little bit better every day, then if I look back a year later, I'm like, wow, look what I did. So while there have been big things, I don't think any of them ever seemed insurmountable to me.
It does seem with music, we all focus on specific things, how to use this effect, how to play that riff. But at the end of the day, the big things that get you through are these bigger life things, like the social component and how to view challenges and difficulty.
Because the small things,
It's fascinating.
the small things, they're accumulative. Like if I spent, a time learning this new compressor, I didn't just learn this new compressor. Okay, I learned what each parameter, which each knob does, but I learned a lot more about compression. I learned a lot more about music while I was doing it, and all those lessons that I learned from just learning that one plugin are transferable to the next musical situation I'm in. So each learning experience might look small, but it adds exponentially to your overall journey.
So if you look back, is there anything you would have done differently in how you approached learning, and how you approached getting to where you are now?
I don't think so. And I'll explain. I mean, everybody has things they're like, oh, that opportunity, this opportunity, but I'm very happy with the way I learn and with my curiosity, because I think my curiosity has gotten me a long way. Um, a great example, which I think I mentioned to you earlier, was Centorial, right? So I realized as I'm producing while I was working, moving knobs, and this sounds good and that sounds good. I realized there's a massive gap in my knowledge on sound design, right? I would work in the original days. I would work on like with synths that really didn't allow you to get too far under the hood. So like Nexus and stuff like that had a lot of interesting presets, but you can't really get as deep with Nexus that you can say with like Massive, or like with like Serum or stuff like that. You can't really get that deep. And I would start with all these presets, and I'd hear other things in my head, and I'm like, I can grab knobs all day, but I don't really know exactly what what can I get there. And then I found Centorial, right? Which quite literally led me through, okay, this controls the attack. This is what the attack does. I remember your voice talking about the sound of like the brass, the synth brass sound, and kind of figuring out, okay, well, that's what the decay does, and working one parameter at a time, and I did like a lesson a day, and it was fun because it was kind of like a challenge. Ooh, can I match the sound? Can I not match the sound? But once I realized that, like, that's the way to do it, that I can learn like that, then I was just off to the races. And I think I'm really happy that I always look for that. If I would say there's anything to be done differently, is maybe realize, hoping, I don't know, maybe YouTube could have come around earlier. You know, there's so much to learn online, but from so many great producers, and who just stream themselves sitting around working on tracks. And you're like, wow, that's great. This is great. You pick up so much. Um, I'm just happy I've been open to it for most of my life. So I would change any of that.
And for our listeners, Chen just mentioned Centorial, which is another super effective course that we created, which will teach you synthesis. It comes with a built-in soft synth that you'll make hundreds of patches on as you progress through the course. It starts at the very beginning, teaching you one control at a time, until before you know it, you're making great sounding patches by ear on a synth packed with all the essential controls that you see on most synths. Check it out at Centorial.com.
Are you currently learning anything new right now, or kind of your eyes on something you want to learn?
Every day, all the time. Oh my God. Um, there's so much that I want to learn that I get to the point where I have to like kind of create like not lessons for myself, but like limit myself to it. So, um, several years ago, I got into more orchestral writing and more scoring, as opposed to just doing songs and stuff like that. And just any media that I can devour that has to do with scoring picture and that has to do with working with big orchestral templates and mixing orchestral type music. I go to town on. There's a it started with Junkie XL. He's got a YouTube page. He's the Tom Hokenberg, I think is his last name. He's a film composer. And he just decided to open up his studio and say, "This is exactly what I do all day long," you know. And I've watched every video on that website like 20 times,
Oh,
and
really?
yeah, and just try to pick up stuff, and I learn stuff all the time, and also at some point I went and I sought out a great orchestration teacher, Ella Feingold, um, and and learned. I know I didn't take it forever, but I learned a lot about orchestration. I took like I think 4 or 5 classes, and just stuff that I never even considered I would ever even think about, and learn a lot about orchestrating for orchestra, which ended up somehow coming back around and working for me on pop stuff that I was doing that had some
Huh.
orchestral stuff going on. So that's really what I concentrate a lot on um, these days. And I still watch like streams of like Ian Kirkpatrick and stuff like that because he has amazing stuff. I'm in Cubase right now, so Cubase anything in Cubase is like I consume that. But yeah,
Okay, that's cool. So, do you often find that when you plan to learn something for one reason, like orchestration, that it unexpectedly helps you out in a totally different scenario?
every time, every
Yeah.
single time, each musical lesson I learn finds its way into everything I'm doing or informs something else I'm doing in a different way, which is just the most amazing thing about music. And the most amazing thing about it is that it's never done. It's never over. There's never a scenario. I don't think there's anybody in this world or ever was anybody in this world that could say, I am a master of music. I know everything there is to know about it. It's not possible. And there's just so much that I can learn and how it transfers from one to the other. I the fact that I became better as a songwriter is what made me better as a producer. And the fact that I'm better as a producer is what makes me better as a songwriter. And that's in a macro level. In a micro level, you know, um, learning how to write like for strings, 4 parts for strings, right, has made me more conscious about voice leading and voice movement inside you know other parts I'm doing for excuse me, for pop songs or stuff like that. um yeah, everything I learn finds its way to inform something else I do, so I'm very happy about that because otherwise yeah.
That's cool. Well, and thank you again for doing this. Just so much insight, so many things to learn from you, and I really loved having this conversation.
Thank you for having me. If you tell people who love what they do to talk about what they love, you can go on forever. So,
Right.
you know, but yeah, I enjoy what I do. I've been privileged to do it, with amazing people, for a long time, and hopefully keep doing it longer.
I'm sure you will.
Yeah.
All right, man. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Audible Genius podcast. Now, as you listen to these musicians' stories, you may find yourself wanting to make your own music. Or maybe you already can, but you feel the need to brush up on fundamentals, fill in some gaps. Well, I've got some super effective and engaging courses that help aspiring digital musicians find their voice and create music they love. And these courses are more than just a series of videos. They have interactive challenges in a music software environment where you actually create music as you go and get real experience. The first course I recommend is Building Blocks, where you'll learn beat composition and music theory in an online music studio. Check it out at audiblegenius.com. We also have Centorial, an award-winning course on synthesis, where you'll learn how to create your own sounds with a synthesizer. Check that out at centorial.com. And both of these courses are designed by yours truly and the team here at Audible Genius. So if you've ever had a desire to make your own music, I highly encourage you to check them out. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.